use that thing. You got to go to Bank of America or, you know, Wells Fargo or something like that, or Chase, you know, or a title loan place, right? So there's a lower level of liquidity in the way that pieces of paper can be used to, you know, the value of it can be used, but you can convert it. You can go to the bank and you can convert it to these higher liquid Federal Reserve notes. Well, receipts, bills, and bank statements are kind of over here. You need to take some necessary steps to take these receipts, bills, and bank statements over to the second stage of liquidity. Now you can take those pieces of paper when they're at the second stage of liquidity, bring them to the third stage. So just because they're low liquid doesn't mean they don't have the value. They do. It's just you got to take them through a little three-ring circus. A couple different customary acts will put them right on that level of second stage liquidity, and then you'll know what to do because you've been doing it with title to a car or a house your entire life. Okay, and this is one of the big things right here, is publishing, okay? So after you account, you've got your record. I've got my record, here it is. I got my record of our album, we all made it together, okay? And the next step is we want to tell everybody, right? And what's the biggest publishing network out there right now that has blown up over the past few years? Facebook. Facebook is just a massive publishing network, right? And so publishing, it makes it available for other people to see, and now the value can be reflected. And all these comments and shares, stock, is being created as a result. Say something? I don't know. Okay. So you're making it available for public speculation, but hey, I can build a website. We can throw our album on there, and we can sit and put it for sale. But chances are, when like a week goes by, a month goes by, we don't really get very many sales. Why? Because not enough people know about it. Just because you publish something doesn't mean everybody knows. So what do you got to do next? You got to tell everybody that you published it, right? You have to promote it, advertise it. Noticing, reporting is a form of taking something that you've published out in the world and letting everybody know that you published it. You do the same thing on Facebook. Yeah, you make a post on Facebook, and then you maybe share it on a couple friends' pages, or you share it in a group, or whatever, and maybe they share it too. Go ahead.
I just had this thought, promotion, it's promotion.
You got it.
You have to move.
Right.
You have to be in favor of moving up, get off your ass.
Get off your ass and make something move. And really, this is just business right here. Like, in the simplest level, this is business. It's like you can take this idea of making this record, this musical record, and take it into every single aspect of manifestation that you want. How many artists do you guys know out there? I can name a few. Artists, amazing artists, poor. Not enough business. Like amazing artists struggling because they don't have enough business, right? Because why? They don't promote. They may have, or maybe some of their stuff isn't even published. You got to take these necessary steps. Now, this is the exact same in finance. Okay? This is, you take a record, your receipt, if it sits in your house all day, nobody knows about the value. You just exchange buying eggs and having a little, cake making party or whatever you're doing, So maybe you want to take those things and you want to publish them, right? And then you want to take that publication, you want to let everybody know that it's published. And then after you let everybody know, all of a sudden everybody's interested. Everybody's interested in what's going on. And so now you say, okay, now that it's being promoted, we're going to set sail, which is really we're making our berth now. We set up our sail on our vessel, and we make that newly manifested idea available to prospective buyers, okay, who are interested in the value that's being exchanged because they went in on it because they all got FOMO, right? Fear of missing out, right? They don't want to miss out on this value that's being exchanged on this record, and it's all over the place. Everybody's talking about it, So anyway, this is just some ideas of how you take something intangible and you make it into tangible, and just kind of take that with any artistry that you're doing in your life or any type of business, but also realize that in finance the exact same principles exist. Okay, it's how Federal Reserve notes were created. How did they become part of the belief system where everybody believes they're valuable? They went through a little similar process. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, we're going to talk about private versus public real quick, because we have private contracts and public contracts. It's important to know the power of both. So in private contracts, a synonym for private is foreign. Okay? Because if I have this private contract that I just make with you guys, and it never leaves this room, do the people of the United States know about it? No. They don't know about it. They don't respect it. They don't recognize it as even existing. It's not, they haven't accounted for it. There's no way they can, because nobody ever let them know, let them in on our inside little private agreement that's going on. Well, it's the same thing kind of works if you want to get into like a private agreement with a company. Let's say you get a bill in the mail, and maybe you're going to take that bill, which is your stock, and you're going to use it in such a way where you're going to tender it to them to settle the debt. How many people are familiar with that idea? Taking your bill and using your bill to settle your debt. Okay, so everything to us is an asset and a liability. Okay? Now, it's very common for most of us when we get a bill in the mail to recognize which side.
The liability.
The liability. We get a bill, we just see the liability aspect of it. Okay? But let's look at what banks do real quick. If I go to a bank and I give them $10, okay, is that $10 an asset or a liability to them?
Liability.
How is it a liability? Go ahead, you're right. How is it a liability? They got to pay me back, right?
Yeah.
And so they're liable to pay me back. When I go and demand that money, they're liable. How is it an asset? You're gaining $10. They can use it to go make loans and say, oh, I got this much money in the account. And they know about monetizing. You can loan up to 10 times the amount of money you have on your books. Well, they just created an extra $10 on their books, and now they can loan an extra $100. Right? Okay? So by the way, that idea comes from Modern Money Mechanics, which is published by the Federal Reserve. So the bank recognizes something that we're giving them as an asset and a liability. That's possible, to recognize something as an asset and a liability. Maybe everybody hear a story about like buying a boat. Like the 2 greatest days of buying a boat is
when you buy it, when you sell it.
When you buy it and when you sell it, right? Because the boat is what? It's an asset, but it's also a liability. Having a child, asset and liability. Anybody else got any other ideas? Dude, that's the prime example right there. Living is totally an asset and a liability. Okay, so again, we can take this all over the place in driving a car, right? Asset and liability. Okay, so we can take that idea of recognizing an asset and a liability in anything in the world and look at that is just simply a law of nature. Okay? Go ahead.
I just have a question, because everything that we just talked about right there are more of like the asset, what we would consider assets, like living, like having a car, things like that we consider assets. What about the things that we consider the liabilities, like breaking your arm?
Right.
How would you consider that an asset as well? Because everything does have the 2 sides. It looks like everything that we just talked about was the asset side.
Right.
In our minds or in the typical person's mind.
Right.
How do you think of that?
Yeah, or going to jail.
Yeah. So
how is that an asset?
How?
Right? So there's some of this stuff is a little bit more twisted than others. Some is really easy for us to see, but others is like, well, if you listen to Gordon Hall, anybody know who Gordon Hall is? Cool. If you listen to Gordon Hall, he's he started 24-Hour Fitness. He's one of the founders of, like, either the founder or one of the founders of 24-Hour Fitness. And he does kind of talks like this, right? But in his own Gordon way. And one of his like famous stories was that he was in jail and ended up contracting himself out of jail, from within jail. Okay? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just thinking of an answer to your question. Let's say if you broke your right arm, well, it's quite possible then your left hand would start developing new talents. Or you may meet a really, if you're a single guy, you may meet a beautiful nurse and get married because you go to the hospital.
There we go. Now what are we doing? We are discovering and recognizing assets that are existing simultaneously to the liability. And then the liability never went away. We broke our arm. It freaking sucks. We broke our freaking arm. You know? Go ahead. What's
They're colored.
Colored. Right.
They're masked.
They're masked.
That looks like a liability. It's a liability.
You got it. You got it. Okay. Now, under the Comptroller of the Currency's Handbook on Bankers' Acceptances, which is a publication, okay, they talk about when you accept a draft, and a draft is defined in the UCC as one of the synonyms for it is order, and a draft and an order are also a bill, okay? That a draft can be accepted, okay? And when you accept a draft under the Comptroller of the Currency's Handbook, again, don't take my word for it, because I'm just giving you a telephone version, okay? So you go check it out for yourself. But they say that when you accept a draft, you're supposed to account for it as an asset and a liability. Now, if we're entering into this asset and liability idea and seeing both sides, though they are opposites of one another, like the black and white dot, are their values complementary? So if you have a liability, let's say you got a bill in the mail and your liability is $100, and you were to recognize the asset, how much is the asset worth?
$100.
Right, right. Now what if there was a way, and again, there are books and publications such as Uniform Commercial Code and this Comptroller of the Currency's Handbook on Bankers' Acceptances, where you can take your asset and assign it to the person you're liable to set off your debt. You never had to write a check from your bank account. You simply had to recognize the asset that existing simultaneously with the liability, and give your asset away to the person you're liable to settle the debt. Seems pretty easy. There's a couple little pieces that have to go along with that. But that's the idea right there. And take that in life, where the problem that you have, if you are having a problem or a dilemma, whether it be in creating or whatever, your problem, within the problem lies the solution, right? So within the liability lies your asset, okay? And like we were talking about earlier, with when you get a summons into court, there's the word payment, okay? That's like a big word when we're dealing with like, oh, you have to pay, okay? Payment means performance of an obligation, okay? So we were saying earlier that the plaintiff was obligated to make sure the defendant was served with the summons. And the defendant receiving the summons and holding it in hand and showing it to everybody was evidence that the plaintiff performed his obligation. Which means what? The summons is a form of payment from the plaintiff to the defendant of his share of the complaint. So maybe you can use that summons and say, okay, guilty as charged, I accept the complaint, and then hand over your summons to the court so that the court can broker it and pay the plaintiff. Okay, now what we're getting into, if these concepts are new, is this is just a card game that we're playing. We're using symbols on pieces of paper to convey information, and by the way we arrange those symbols, it can have a drastic effect on the way we play the game. And a lot of us, if we don't recognize the symbols, the hieroglyphics, and we have a limited perspective of the way those symbols are used, well then we're going to end up taking a lot of these symbols that come our way, a lot of these titles, a lot of this stock, right? These pieces of paper, and discard it. What happens if you play poker and discard every card that wasn't a face card? What happens if you only thought the face cards were of value and you got 4 2s? You discard, looking for a king or something like that. Would you think you're going to win very often? No, because you're playing the game in a level of scarcity, okay? But if you recognize that, man, I'm from Vegas, I know some good poker players out there. And what they say to me is they say that, honestly, he's like, I'm no really better than anybody. I still get dealt cards randomly just like anybody else does. He goes, but what I recognize is I can win with hands that most people cannot win with. And what is that? That's alchemy. That's lead into gold. That's trash into treasure. Okay? So I'm here to spark your curiosity about these pieces of paper that you touch every single day, okay, for the most part, unless you're going on a little retreat to Peru or something, or whatever, live in the jungle, but you're taking these pieces of paper in hand every day that have value, and there is a way to utilize that energy, okay, those raw materials that you got there, and to use them in such a way, it's going to make your life a whole lot easier. But there's a dilemma with scarcity in that there's not enough. Well, when you enter into abundance and finance, there's a new dilemma. There's too much. Okay, so foreign, if you think about something foreign, if you brought something into a court and they said, we don't recognize this. It hasn't been domesticated. It's foreign to that court, okay? If you were to form a private contract between you and like a bank, let's say you were accepting your bill and you were tendering it out to them for payment and full satisfaction of the obligation of the liability that they say you owe. And that contract you just kept private between you and that other party and maybe a witness, okay? But that person ends up filing a complaint against you in court saying that you never paid. Who's going to end up prevailing? Well, if they file their complaint in court and you don't end up showing up, their stuff is being published, okay? And the judge only has the eyes of the people. So you got to take that private contract and kind of bring it into the public world so that it can operate and be recognized in your private world, but also in the public world, okay? And there's this common misconception out there that when I publish, I lose my privacy, right? But that's not necessarily true. You don't lose anything when you give. And that's being in the abundant state of mind, right? When you give, you're ever giving because you are operating from a state of abundance. It's only when you're in that state of scarcity that when you give, you feel like you have less, right? Okay, so foreign being, there's limited parties of interest. They're not generally recognized by the public or the people. They're generally non-taxable, and they're limited in growth. Okay, so you can keep things private. It has benefits, but here's a couple of the things that go along with it. Domestic is quite the opposite. There are many parties of interest. When you file a court case, the state's involved. The people of the state are involved. The county is often involved. The people of the county are involved. There's a bailiff. There's a clerk. There's a clerk's deputy. There's the person who delivered the summons to you. There's all types of parties of interest, okay? But you're also subject to the laws of that state, of the people the state of consciousness where you publish at. And also you're going to be liable for a tax, right? There's tax liabilities and there's tax benefits. Go ahead, next slide. Well, first thing, before you go to the next slide. Oh, we already went there. I was going to ask, what is the solution to if we have pros and cons of private and pros and cons of public, what is the solution, the diplomatic solution? To make it international, to make it both private and public, to make it both foreign and domestic. When we operate in international law, we will have the benefits of both worlds. Go ahead and bring it to that slide. Okay. So domestic and foreign policy are utilized and become international policy. So therefore, you don't lose any of your private standing, but it'll be recognized in the public world. So we have that your contract is going to be recognized and enforceable in multiple jurisdictions. It just so happens that the seat of international law is called the Peace Palace. How about that? Okay? Now, if we look at our black dot, white dot scenario, and we say inside the black dot is private and outside the black dot is public, or vice versa, okay? What's the best of both worlds when we're operating with both, right? So what's international? When we have a white dot with a black background and a black dot with a white background. Okay, I reference a couple different codes here. If you want to check out how foreign judgments are recognized, you could check out The Hague, which is the world's, the Peace Palace here holds the World Court. There's the convention at The Hague, and I think The Hague is actually like a city that the International Court is in. There's the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court that both take place in The Hague. But again, don't quote me on it, look it up for yourself. Hague Convention on the Recognition and Enforcement of Foreign Judgments in Civil and Commercial Matters. That's on the international level. And on the national level, we have the Uniform Enforcement of Foreign Judgments Act. And then on the state level, we have the Money Judgments Act. And CCP stands for, what is it, the Code of Civil Procedure or something like that? Something of that nature. It's not the Civil Code. No, I think it's the Code of Civil, something like that. There's CCP and I think there's another one that's similar that I mix them up sometimes. So check that out in your California law, 1713, 1713.8. How do we go about making our foreign private policy into international policy? Well, international policy is when the foreign country's law and the domestic country's law see eye to eye, right? Remember we're talking about if I just go in there saying, I got my customs, I'm my own country, blah, blah, blah. I don't respect anybody else's country. Am I going to be recognized? No. Because why? I didn't pass through customs. To pass through customs, I got to recognize, I got to make my customs match the other party's customs. And then that's going to create a window of commonality. We got to have common ground. And in that common ground, we can go ahead and recognize not only how we're different, but how we're alike through international law. All right, so that there's a lot of other stuff I actually have to share, but basically running out of time. I'm going to close off with a little something, but the goal of today was just to kind of present a colorable idea, a collective idea, I guess, on contraction and expansion and how it exists in commerce and how commerce exists all around us. It exists in nature, and there's nothing unnatural about it. So we really don't have any excuse to say that the system's not working or to say that, oh, you know, the president's to blame or anybody's to blame, because they're all bound by the laws of nature, and commerce is a law of nature. You know, it's not something that was necessarily created by man. There was a little discussion on my the group today we have on Facebook about whether animals engage in commerce. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Do animals engage in commerce?
Sure.
Right? I mean, just like on a really simple way, do animals acknowledge territory and land? Who has the right to that land? What happens if you come on that land? Right? So, yeah. Any questions or anything generally or anything like that about any of the subject matter that was covered? Cool. I'm interested in presenting information like this about under the subjects of finance, law, and government, kind of on like a once-a-month basis. I also do webinars and stuff like that that are just online, and they cover some, you know, maybe like there's a couple ones that were done in the past, like one on just acceptances, you know, like about accepting the draft, that idea. Another one just on accounting. And but I'd like to have kind of a physical community of people who kind of share the interest in this kind of stuff, and maybe you guys can network together, and that would help and assist you guys in whatever, you know, your interests are with regards to commerce or regards to finance, law, and government. So if you're interested in something like that, go ahead and leave me your email address, and if we have enough interested parties, then maybe we'll turn this into a monthly event. And any ideas that may contribute to making something like that happen, or any improvements, you know, go ahead and let me know. All right, I got one more thing to close out on. Actually, you can do it right there. It's just a little poem. I kind of like writing little poems because I see this all as like very theatrical. You know, I think that the court is the theater of law, but it kind of trumps what a regular theater is, because a regular theater has an audience and the performers. And in court, any party who comes can actually perform in the play. And the play is being recorded at all times. You also have the freedom to bring your own recorder in there. And, you know, I got that vision of how it was during the Renaissance period in the past, is It was a very lively situation when you hold court. So, all right, go ahead to our last little poem, titled Magnificent Garden Party. Hear ye, all hands on deck. Captain, call the messenger to deal cards of branded paper. If we do not have enough to go around, tell the drawer to file suit. For he is the artisan who can break ample bread so as to feed our starving crew. He makes crumb into seed and plants it in such a way that it fruits and flowers by the canonical hours and is ready for harvest by the break of day. He gives all a taste of these supple morsels by lying it on the tea time table, which makes up our court, the colored flower sort, a collective, factitious fable. We call on the Lady Sue to initiate this clever occasion, and after she blesses us with her agriculturalistic mystere, the messenger will make a formal announcement. You have been sued. Convene the crew to fall in suit, to carry the customs of worthy repute. Do remember your aboriginal roots, and harness the heir's right to loot. The power is yours to defend the keep. In trust you have all the tools you need. But 'tis the foul of play to take advice from me, a humble servant of your majesty. Thanks.